The bullet tore through Lydia's shoulder the moment she stepped between Ethan and the barrel of Calvin Rourke's rifle. Blood bloomed across her pale dress like winter roses as she fell, and in that suspended second, that terrible, beautiful moment, Ethan Cole understood what love actually cost. Not vows, not promises whispered in darkness, but flesh, bone, the willingness to bleed for someone who'd started as a stranger sent by mail. This is their story: a mail-order bride who arrived broken, a cowboy too damaged to believe in second chances, and a Wyoming winter that forced them both to choose between surviving alone or living together. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, carried by a circuit rider who looked half frozen and wholly irritated at having to venture this far into Wyoming's backcountry for a single piece of correspondence. Ethan Cole stood on the porch of his ranch house, a structure more functional than welcoming, and stared at the envelope like it might bite. His name was written in handwriting he recognized: Tom Halloran, an old friend from his cavalry days, now living comfortable and domesticated down in Cheyenne. They exchanged letters twice a year, usually around Christmas and midsummer, brief updates that said everything and nothing at all. This wasn't the season for either. "You gonna read it or just hold it till spring?" the writer asked, already turning his horse back toward the valley road. Ethan didn't answer. He waited until the hoofbeats faded into the vast silence that defined this corner of the territory before breaking the seal. "Ethan, I've done something you're going to curse me for, but I did it anyway because I know you and I know what that ranch is doing to you. Solitude is one thing. Slow death is another. Her name is Lydia Moore. She's a widow, 26 years old, and she needs a new start as badly as you need someone to share that godforsaken piece of land with. She's agreed to come as your wife, an arrangement, nothing more unless you both choose otherwise. She arrives on the afternoon stage Friday next. Be there, Ethan. I've already paid her passage. Don't make me regret trusting you with this." Tom Ethan read the letter 3 times, each pass stoking a different fire in his chest. Anger first. How dare Tom meddle in his life, make decisions about his future without consultation? Then confusion, because this was insane even by frontier standards. Finally, something he didn't want to name, something that felt dangerously close to hope, and that scared him more than Sioux war parties ever had. He crumpled the letter, then smoothed it out again. Friday. That gave him 4 days. 4 days to decide if he was going to meet that stage or let it roll on through, carrying this Lydia Moore to whatever fate awaited unclaimed mail-order brides in frontier towns. He looked out across his land, 200 acres of grass and wind and memories. The barn needed repairs. The fence line had gaps a blind cow could find. The house echoed with absences that had stopped feeling temporary and started feeling permanent. "Damn you, Tom," he muttered, but he was already calculating what needed to be done before Friday. The town of Broken Creek wasn't much. A general store, a saloon that doubled as a boarding house, a church that saw more funerals than weddings, and a stage depot that serviced the route between Cheyenne and the mining settlements up north. Ethan rode in just after noon on Friday, his best shirt laundered, his jaw freshly shaved for the first time in 2 weeks. He felt ridiculous. Sam Porter, who ran the depot, gave him a knowing look when he dismounted. "Expecting someone, Cole? Stage on time?" "When is it ever? Should be here within the hour, barring trouble." Sam leaned against the depot wall, tobacco staining the corner of his smile. "Heard you got yourself a bride coming in. That true?" Small towns, Ethan thought, had mouths bigger than their populations. News travels. "Always does. Good for you, though. Man shouldn't live alone the way you do. Gets strange after a while." Ethan didn't dignify that with a response. He found a spot on the depot bench where he could watch the road and waited, feeling every minute stretch like taffy. The stage rolled in 40 minutes later, trailing dust and the driver's creative profanity about the condition of the northern road. 3 passengers disembarked, a mining company clerk heading up to the camps, an older woman visiting family, and then her. Lydia Moore. Ethan knew her immediately, though he couldn't have said how. Maybe it was the way she held herself, careful and contained, like someone conserving energy for a long journey. Maybe it was the single small carpet bag she carried, everything she owned compressed into something she could lift with one hand. Or maybe it was her eyes. They were the palest gray he'd ever seen, like winter sky before snowfall, and they swept across the depot platform with the wariness of a deer checking a clearing for wolves. She was small, barely came up to his shoulder when she finally stood before him. Thin, too, in a way that spoke of missed meals rather than natural build. Her dress was dark blue, practical, mended carefully at the cuffs. Her hair, pinned beneath a simple bonnet, was the color of honey in shadow. "Mr. Cole?" Her voice was quiet but steady. "Ethan," he corrected, then realized he'd been staring. "You're Lydia." "Yes." An awkward silence bloomed between them, filled by the sounds of the stage driver unhitching his team and Sam Porter's barely concealed eavesdropping. "I have a wagon," Ethan said finally, gesturing vaguely toward the hitching post. "The ranch is about an hour's ride." "All right." She didn't ask questions, didn't demand reassurances or explanations, just picked up her bag and followed him to the wagon with the resigned grace of someone accustomed to following where life pushed. Ethan loaded her bag, noticing how light it was, how little she'd brought to this new life, and helped her up to the seat. Her hand in his was cold despite the afternoon warmth, and when their eyes met, he saw something flicker across her face. Not quite fear, not quite trust, something suspended between. They rode in silence for the first 20 minutes, the wagon wheels finding every rut in the road, the late September sun slanting golden across the grasslands. Ethan snuck glances at her when he thought she wasn't looking, trying to reconcile Tom's letter with the reality beside him. She needs a new start as badly as you need someone to share that God-forsaken piece of land with. What had she been running from? What had turned a 26-year-old woman into someone who'd agree to marry a stranger sight unseen and travel to the edge of civilization on faith alone? "Tom Halloran," Lydia said suddenly, breaking the silence. "He's the friend who arranged this?" "Yes, we served together, years back." "He spoke well of you, said you were honorable." Ethan absorbed that, unsure how to respond. Tom's generous with his assessments. "Are you not honorable, then?" The question was direct, unadorned with coyness or games. Ethan appreciated that, even as it unsettled him. "I try to be," he said carefully, "but I'm not much for company. Haven't been around people regularly in a long time. The ranch is isolated. Nearest neighbor's 6 miles off. If you're expecting social calls and town visits, you'll be disappointed." "I'm not expecting anything," Lydia replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Except perhaps to be useful." The word choice struck him. Not happy, not safe, useful. "About the arrangement," Ethan began, then faltered. "How did you have this conversation?" "I want you to understand something. Tom may have sent you as a wife, but you don't owe me anything you're not willing to give. I won't—" He cleared his throat, feeling heat crawl up his neck despite the autumn air. "I won't force expectations on you. The house has 2 rooms. You'll have your privacy." Lydia turned to look at him fully for the first time since they'd left town, those pale gray eyes searching his face with an intensity that made him want to squirm. "You're saying this is in name only unless I choose otherwise?" "Yes." "Why?" The question caught him off guard. "Why what? Why agree to this at all if you're not expecting, if you don't want—" She trailed off, some of her composure cracking. Men don't usually send for wives without wanting something in return. Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. "I'm not most men, and I didn't send for you. Tom took that liberty himself. But since you're here, and since you apparently need this arrangement as much as he thinks I do, I'm offering you a place, a home, safety, if I can provide it. The rest, marriage in truth rather than paper, that's something that can't be forced. It either grows or it doesn't." "I see." He couldn't read her tone. Couldn't tell if she was relieved or disappointed, or simply processing information like she'd process any other detail of frontier survival. They rode the rest of the way in renewed silence, but it felt different now. Less awkward. More like 2 people who'd established the basic geography of their arrangement and were content to leave further exploration for later. The ranch came into view as the sun touched the western mountains, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. It wasn't much: the house, the barn, the corrals, the small vegetable garden Ethan had half-heartedly maintained. But it was honest work and honest land, and something in his chest loosened when Lydia didn't immediately look disappointed. "It's quiet," she said softly. "Too quiet for some." "No." She shook her head slowly, taking in the vast, empty space around them, the way the wind moved through the grass like water. "Not too quiet. Just quiet." Ethan helped her down from the wagon, this time noticing how she flinched, barely, just a fraction of movement, when his hands circled her waist. He stepped back immediately, giving her space, and saw gratitude flash across her features. What had been done to this woman to make her so skittish? "I'll show you the house," he said, keeping his voice level, unthreatening. The interior was clean but sparse. Ethan had spent the last 4 days scrubbing and organizing, trying to make the space less obviously that of a solitary man who'd stopped caring about domesticity. The main room held a table, 2 chairs, a potbelly stove, and a rocking chair he'd built during a winter when the isolation had nearly driven him mad with restless energy. The bedroom opened off to the left. His bedroom, though he'd stripped it of personal items and changed the sheets. "This is yours," he said, gesturing to the room. "I'll take the second room." Lydia stepped into the bedroom, setting her bag on the simple wooden chest at the foot of the bed. She ran her hand along the quilt, a wedding ring pattern in blues and whites that had been his mother's, one of the few things he'd kept when she passed. "Where's the second room?" she asked. Ethan felt his ears heat. "Well, it's not finished exactly. More of a storage space right now, but I'll clear it out, make it livable. And until then? The barn's comfortable enough. I've slept in worse." Lydia turned to face him, and something in her expression had shifted. Not softened exactly, but opened slightly, like a door previously locked now showing a crack of light. "You're going to sleep in the barn. For now. Until I get the other room sorted. Because you don't want to frighten me." It wasn't a question, but Ethan answered anyway. "Yes." She studied him for a long moment, and he had the uncomfortable sensation of being assessed, measured against some internal standard she'd developed through hard experience. "Mr. Cole, Ethan." "Ethan," she corrected, the name careful in her mouth. "I want to be clear about something. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. No family, no prospects, no options that didn't end badly. Tom Halloran offered me a chance at something different, and I took it because I'm tired of being afraid all the time. But I'm also not naive. I understand how these arrangements work. You're being kind now, but kindness has limits, especially when a man has needs and a woman is living in his house as his legal wife." "I'm not," Ethan started, but she held up a hand. "Let me finish. I'm grateful for your consideration, truly, but I won't have you sleeping in the barn like you're some hired hand on your own land. If you give me your word that you'll respect the boundaries you've set, then we can share this house like civilized adults until things change, or they don't." Ethan felt something twist in his chest. Admiration, maybe, for her courage in addressing this directly. Anger, too, at whatever had happened to make her expect the worst from men while still facing it head-on. "You have my word," he said quietly. "On my honor as a soldier and a man. I won't touch you without permission. I won't enter your room without invitation. And if I ever break that promise, you have my leave to shoot me with my own rifle." A ghost of something that might have been a smile touched her lips. "I don't know how to shoot. I'll teach you if you want. Useful skill out here." "All right." They stood there in the doorway between the main room and the bedroom, 2 strangers who were legally married but essentially unknown to each other, negotiating the terms of coexistence with more care than most couples managed in a lifetime. "Are you hungry?" Ethan asked finally, breaking the moment. "I've got stew on the stove, nothing fancy, but it's warm." "I am, actually. Thank you." They ate at the small table as twilight deepened into true night outside. Ethan had never been much for conversation, and Lydia seemed content with silence, so they shared the meal with only the sound of spoons against bowls and the occasional crackle from the stove. But he watched her. Couldn't help it. Noticed how she ate slowly, methodically, like someone accustomed to making small portions last. Noticed how she kept her left hand in her lap unless she needed it. Noticed how she glanced at the door every few minutes, tracking exits. When they finished, Lydia stood to clear the dishes. I can do that, Ethan said, rising. So can I. I need to be useful, remember? There was something in her tone that made him pause. You don't have to earn your place here, Lydia. You're not a servant. Then what am I? The question hung between them, complex and unanswerable. You're my wife, Ethan said finally. At least on paper. Beyond that, I suppose we'll figure it out as we go. She nodded slowly, accepting this non-answer, and set about washing the dishes with an efficiency that spoke of long practice. Ethan dried, and they worked in companionable quiet until everything was put away. I should let you rest, Ethan said when they were done. It's been a long day for you. Yes. Lydia hesitated, then met his eyes. Thank you, Ethan, for meeting the stage, for this. She gestured vaguely at the house, the meal, the arrangement. For not being the worst possibility. The phrasing gutted him. Not being the worst possibility. That was the bar she'd set for her life. You're welcome, he managed. Sleep well. You too. She disappeared into the bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. Ethan stood in the main room for a long time, listening to the small sounds of her settling in, the rustle of fabric, the creak of the bed, the whisper-quiet sigh that might have been relief or exhaustion or simple surrender to circumstance. He banked the stove, checked the locks on the door and windows, habits from the war that had never left him, and finally made his way to what he'd grandly called the second room. In reality, it was barely more than a lean-to attached to the back of the house, currently filled with tools, spare lumber, and the accumulated debris of bachelor living. He cleared a space, laid out his bedroll, and tried not to think about the fact that his legal wife was sleeping 20 feet away while he was camped in what amounted to a glorified shed. This was fine. This was right. She needed space, needed safety, needed time to understand that he meant what he'd said about boundaries and respect. But as Ethan lay in the darkness, listening to the wind test the walls and the coyotes sing their lonely songs to the moon, he couldn't shake the image of Lydia's pale gray eyes, or the haunted way she'd said, I'm tired of being afraid all the time. What had she survived? What had shaped her into someone who measured success by the absence of worst-case scenarios? And more troubling still, what would it take to help her believe she deserved more than just not the worst possibility? Ethan woke to the smell of coffee and the disorienting realization that he wasn't alone on the ranch anymore. He dressed quickly, finger-combed his hair into something resembling order, and emerged from the lean-to find Lydia already up, the kitchen area transformed. She'd found the coffee, the skillet, and apparently the eggs he'd collected yesterday and forgotten about. Breakfast, actual breakfast, not the hardtack and jerky he'd become accustomed to, was laid out on the table. Morning, he said, feeling awkward in his own house. Good morning. She poured coffee into 2 tin cups with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. I hope you don't mind. I woke early and couldn't get back to sleep, so I thought I'd make myself useful. There was that word again, useful. I don't mind, Ethan said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Thank you. They ate together, the morning sun streaming through the window and painting everything in shades of gold. Lydia had made eggs scrambled with wild onions she must have found in the garden, and bread toasted over the stove. It was simple food, but it tasted like civilization, like care, like something he hadn't realized he'd been missing. What needs doing today? Lydia asked, finishing her coffee. On the ranch? More than I can list. But you don't need to. I do, though. She set her cup down with quiet finality. I need to understand how this place works, what you do, where everything is. If I'm going to live here, I need to be part of it, not just decoration in the house. Ethan studied her across the table. In the morning light, he could see details he'd missed yesterday. The faint bruising beneath her eyes that spoke of chronic poor sleep. The way her collar sat loose around a too thin neck. The careful way she held her left hand. All right, he said slowly. I can show you around, introduce you to the stock. The garden probably needs attention. I'm not much for vegetables, but I try to keep some growing. I'm good with gardens. Then it's yours if you want it. Something flickered in her expression, pleasure, maybe, or relief at having claimed a territory of her own. They spent the morning in a tour of the property. Ethan showed her the barn, were his 3 horses, Soldier, a cavalry mount he'd mustered out with, Penny, a stocky mare built for work, and Scout, a young gelding still learning his job, greeted them with curious wickers. He showed her the chicken coop, the root cellar, the tool shed, the well. Lydia absorbed everything with quiet attention, asking occasional questions that revealed a practical mind. How often did the chickens need feeding? Where did he store grain? What predators should she watch for? Coyotes mostly, Ethan answered. Sometimes a mountain lion if winter's hard and they get desperate. But the dogs usually warn us. You have dogs? As if summoned, 2 shapes emerged from the barn, Rook and Bishop, his cattle dogs, who'd been napping in the hayloft. They approached cautiously, suspicious of the stranger. Rook's the black one. Bishop's got the white blaze, Ethan explained. They're working dogs, not pets, but they're good company. Lydia extended her hand slowly, letting them sniff, investigate, accept. Bishop warmed first, tail beginning a tentative wag. Rook held back, watching with the wariness of a dog who'd learned not everyone was trustworthy. He's like me, Lydia murmured, and Ethan didn't think she meant for him to hear it. By midday, they'd covered most of the ranch. Lydia had fallen quiet, but it wasn't the silence of discomfort, more like concentration, filing away information for later use. The garden's a mess, Ethan admitted when they finally circled back to the vegetable patch behind the house. I try, but I don't have the touch for it. Lydia walked the rows, cataloging what was growing, what was dying, what needed help. You've got good bones here. Tomatoes are struggling, but they might produce before first frost if we prop them up. Squash is wild but healthy, and these... She knelt beside a tangle of something green and vigorous. These are potatoes. Did you know you had potatoes? I planted something there in spring, forgot what. For the first time since she'd arrived, Lydia smiled. It was small, barely a curve of lips, but it transformed her face from merely pretty to something luminous. You have potatoes, she said again, with the satisfaction of someone who'd found treasure. We'll eat well this winter. We. The word settled into Ethan's chest like a warm stone. I'll leave this to you then, he said. I need to check the fence line before weather turns. All right. She was already mentally planning, he could tell, prioritizing what needed immediate attention. Ethan left her there, surrounded by the wild volunteers of his neglected garden, and headed out to ride the property line. It was work that needed doing, but it also gave him space to think, to process the reality of no longer being alone. The fence did need repairs. 3 posts rotted through, wire sagging in places where deer or elk had pressed through. He worked methodically, replacing posts, tightening wire, falling into the rhythm of physical labor that had always helped him think. What was he doing? He'd agreed to this arrangement because Tom had bullied him into it, but also because some part of him had recognized the truth in Tom's letter. The ranch was killing him slowly. Not the work. He could handle work. But the isolation, the silence, the way days bled into each other without meaning or marker. Now he had Lydia, a woman so damaged she measured her life in degrees of non-catastrophe, and he had no idea how to help her, or if helping was even what she wanted. Maybe she just needed space and time, and the absence of threat. Maybe that was enough. He was still thinking when he rode back as the sun began its descent, the afternoon lengthening toward evening. Smoke rose from the chimney, and as he got closer, he could smell something cooking, something good, something that made his mouth water. Lydia was at the stove when he entered, stirring a pot that gave off the most amazing aroma. She'd changed from her traveling dress into something simpler, a work dress in faded brown, her hair pinned up more practically. I found vegetables in the cellar, she said without looking up. And you had beef from whenever you last butchered. I hope you don't mind. I made stew, proper stew, not just meat and water. Mind? I'm grateful. Ethan washed up at the basin, suddenly aware of the dirt under his nails, the sweat drying on his skin. You didn't have to go to such trouble. It's not trouble. It's supper. They ate again at the small table, but this time the food was extraordinary. Rich beef stew with carrots, potatoes, onions, and herbs. She must have dried from the garden. Bread she'd somehow baked in his temperamental oven. It was the best meal Ethan had eaten in years. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked around a mouthful of bread. Lydia's face shuddered slightly. "My mother taught me before she died. Then I had practice. Lots of practice." The way she said it made him think that practice had not been voluntary or pleasant. He didn't press. "Well, it's amazing, thank you." "You're welcome." After supper, as they cleaned up together, falling into a routine that felt both strange and natural, Lydia spoke again. "I need to tell you something." The seriousness in her tone made Ethan stop, dish rag in hand. "All right. I'm not completely well. Physically, I mean." She kept her eyes on the dish she was washing, scrubbing the same spot over and over. "I get tired easily, sometimes dizzy. I'm stronger than I look, but there are limits. I wanted you to know so you don't think I'm lazy or shirking if I need to rest." "I wouldn't think that. Men usually do. When a woman can't keep up, can't do what's expected..." She cut herself off, shook her head. "Anyway, now you know." Ethan chose his words carefully. "Have you seen a doctor?" "Once, a while ago. He said I was run down, needed better food, less stress, more rest, like that was something I could just decide to have." Bitterness crept into her voice, quickly suppressed. "You can have it here. All of that. This isn't a prison, Lydia. You're not on trial. If you need to rest, rest. If you need help, ask. I'm not going to judge you for being human." She finally looked at him, those pale gray eyes searching. "You say that now. I'll say it tomorrow too, and the day after, for as long as it takes you to believe it." Something in her expression crumpled and reformed like ice breaking and water flowing beneath. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "How to just be, without waiting for the other shoe to drop." "Then we'll figure it out together," Ethan said quietly. "I'm not much good at this either, if I'm honest. I've been alone too long, probably forgotten how to be around people. But we'll stumble through it, and maybe we'll both come out better on the other side." Lydia nodded slowly, and Ethan saw her swallow hard, fighting something bigger than the moment. "I'm going to turn in," she said finally. "It's been a long day. Sleep well." She paused at her bedroom door, hand on the frame, and looked back at him. "Ethan, thank you. For this. For all of it. For being not the worst possibility." A flicker of that smile again, sad and knowing. "For being kind when you didn't have to be." Then she was gone, door closing softly behind her, leaving Ethan alone with the dishes and his thoughts. He finished cleaning up, banked the fire, did his evening checks. But before he retreated to the lean-to, he stood outside Lydia's door, listening to the quiet sounds within. No crying, no distress, just the settling sounds of someone finally, tentatively, beginning to relax. It was a start. Not much of one, maybe, but a start nonetheless. And as Ethan lay in his makeshift bedroom that night, listening to the wind and thinking about the woman sleeping in his house, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Fragile and frightened as a newborn colt, but hope all the same. Maybe Tom had been right. Maybe they both needed this more than either was willing to admit. Time would tell. And for now, Ethan thought, that was enough. The days that followed settled into a rhythm neither of them had anticipated. Careful, quiet, like two wild animals circling the same watering hole, learning that proximity didn't necessarily mean danger. Lydia rose before dawn each morning, and Ethan would wake to the smell of coffee and whatever miracle she'd conjured from his sparse pantry. She worked with a fierce determination that both impressed and worried him, attacking the garden like it had personally offended her, scrubbing floors that were already clean, mending clothes he'd resigned to their worn state years ago. "You don't have to prove anything," he told her on the third morning, finding her on her knees in the garden despite the frost still glittering on the grass. "I'm not proving anything. I'm planting winter turnips before it's too late." But her hands were shaking as she worked the soil, and her face had that translucent quality that came with exhaustion pushed too far. Ethan crouched beside her, close enough to help but far enough not to crowd. "The turnips will wait an hour. Come inside, warm up." "I'm almost done." "Lydia." He waited until she looked at him. "Please." Something in her eyes flickered, surprise maybe, that he'd asked instead of commanded. She sat back on her heels, soil darkening her dress at the knees, and nodded. Inside, Ethan poured her coffee and watched as she wrapped both hands around the cup, drawing warmth. Her fingers were red with cold, dirt embedded under short-clipped nails. "I'm not used to sitting idle," she said quietly. "It feels wrong, dangerous even." "Why dangerous?" She took a long time answering, staring into the dark surface of her coffee like it held secrets. "Because idle hands got punished. Because if you weren't useful, you were a burden. And burdens got—" She stopped, shook her head. "It doesn't matter now." But it did matter. Ethan could see it in the set of her shoulders, the way she held herself like someone always braced for impact. "You're not a burden here," he said carefully, "and nobody's going to punish you for resting. That's not how this works." "How does this work then?" The question came out sharper than he thought she intended. "Because I don't know the rules, Ethan. I don't know what you expect or what happens when I inevitably fail to meet those expectations." "There are no rules, not like you mean." "There are always rules." Ethan set down his own cup, choosing words with the same care he'd use handling a frightened horse. "All right, you want rules? Here they are. 1. You eat when you're hungry, rest when you're tired, and stop when your body tells you to stop. 2. You ask for help if you need it, and you don't apologize for needing it. 3. This is your home now, not a job, not a test. Home. That means you get to just exist here without earning the right every single day." Lydia's eyes had gone bright, and she blinked rapidly, staring at the ceiling. "That's not how the world works." "Maybe not, but it's how this ranch works. It's how I work." He paused, then added more softly, "It's how we work, if you'll let it be." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and they sat in silence while the coffee cooled and the morning sun climbed higher, burning off the frost outside. The days continued their careful unfolding. Ethan worked the ranch, repairing what needed fixing, checking stock, preparing for winter's approach. Lydia claimed the garden and the house as her territory, transforming both with quiet efficiency. The vegetable patch became organized, productive. The house began to smell like bread and herbs and life. But Ethan noticed things. The way Lydia flinched at sudden movements, how she positioned herself in rooms to always face the door. The nightmares that sometimes woke her. He could hear the muffled sounds through the walls, though she never mentioned them and he didn't pry. He noticed how she ate too. Small portions, always leaving food on her plate like she didn't deserve a full meal. It infuriated him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. "Eat," he said one evening when she'd served him a generous helping of stew, but taken barely half that for herself. "I am eating. You're picking. There's more in the pot. You made it. You should enjoy it. I'm not very hungry." "Lydia." He waited until she met his eyes. "When's the last time you let yourself be full? Actually satisfied, not just taking the edge off hunger?" Her face shuddered. "That's a strange question." "Is it? Because I've been watching you ration food like we're in the middle of a famine, and we're not. We have plenty. The garden's producing. I've got beef stored. You can eat until you're full. You should eat until you're full. I don't want to be wasteful. Taking care of yourself isn't waste." They stared at each other across the table, and Ethan could see the war happening behind her eyes. Instinct versus permission, old rules versus new. Finally, she took another serving. Not a large one, but more than she'd allowed herself. It felt like a victory. That night, Ethan lay in his lean-to and thought about damage, about how some wounds were visible, scars you could see and point to, while others lived deeper, in the way a person moved through the world, the assumptions they carried like stones in their pockets. What had been done to Lydia Moore before she became Lydia Cole? And how long would it take before she believed that this, safety, sufficiency, basic human kindness, was real and not another trap waiting to spring? A week into their arrangement, Ethan came back from checking the northern fence line to find Lydia in the garden, collapsed among the potato plants. His heart stopped. Just stopped, like someone had gripped it and squeezed. He was off his horse and running before conscious thought caught up, dropping to his knees beside her. She was conscious but chalk white, breathing shallow, one hand pressed to her chest. "Lydia, Lydia, look at me." He kept his voice level through sheer force of will, even as panic screamed through his veins. "What happened? Are you hurt?" I'm fine, just dizzy. I'll be fine in a minute." But her voice shook, and she wouldn't meet his eyes. "You're not fine. When's the last time you ate today?" "I had coffee this morning." "Coffee's not food. Did you eat breakfast?" "You needed an early start. I didn't want to—" "Lydia." He reached for her shoulder, then stopped himself. "Can I help you up? We need to get you inside." She nodded, and he slipped an arm around her waist, taking most of her weight as they moved slowly toward the house. She felt like bird bones and determination, far too insubstantial. Inside, he guided her to the rocking chair, the most comfortable seat in the house, and immediately set about making food. Bread, cheese, yesterday's chicken soup reheated. He brought it to her with a glass of water and stood there until she started eating. "I'm sorry," she whispered between bites. "I'm sorry. I should have been more careful. I know better." "Stop apologizing. Just eat." She ate, and slowly color began returning to her face. Ethan dragged a chair over and sat facing her, close enough to help if needed, but trying not to hover. "You said you get dizzy sometimes," he said when she'd finished half the bowl. "Is this what you meant?" "Yes. It's worse when I don't eat enough, or when I overdo it." She set the bowl in her lap, shame written across her features. "I thought I was being careful, but I wanted to finish the potatoes before frost, and I lost track of time." "How often does this happen?" "Not often. Not anymore. It was worse before when—" She stopped, redirected. "When I wasn't eating regularly. It's better now. Better here." Ethan absorbed that, piecing together implications. "Before, when you were married." It wasn't a question, but Lydia answered anyway, her voice going flat and distant. "He didn't believe in women getting too comfortable. Said it made us lazy. Kept the pantry locked most of the time. I got what he decided I needed, when he decided I needed it." Rage flared so hot and sudden in Ethan's chest that he had to lock his jaw against it. He wanted to ask where this man was, wanted to find him and teach him about real hunger, real suffering. But that wouldn't help Lydia, who was watching him with wary eyes, gauging his reaction. "He's dead?" Ethan managed, keeping his voice even. "Yes. 2 years ago. Accident at the mill where he worked. They said he was crushed instantly." No sorrow in her voice. No grief. Just statement of fact. "Good." The word came out harder than he intended, and Lydia's eyes widened slightly. "I mean," Ethan rubbed his face, trying to find better words. I'm glad he can't hurt you anymore. I'm glad you're here instead of there. And I'm sorry, sorrier than I can say, that anyone ever made you feel like you had to earn food, or safety, or basic human decency." Lydia's hands trembled on the soup bowl. "You don't know the whole story." "I don't need to. Whatever happened, whatever he did or said to justify it, it was wrong. You know that, don't you?" She looked away, jaw working like she was chewing on words too difficult to speak. Finally, she whispered, "Knowing and believing are different things." "Yeah," Ethan said softly. "Yeah, they are." They sat in silence for a while, the autumn afternoon light slanting through the windows, dust motes drifting lazy and golden. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the boards in that particular way that promised weather coming. "I need you to promise me something," Ethan said eventually. "You eat breakfast, every day. Even if I've already left, even if you think it's wasteful or you're not hungry. You eat. And if you start feeling dizzy or wrong, you stop whatever you're doing and you rest. Can you promise me that?" "I'll try." "Not good enough. Promise me." Lydia met his eyes, and something in her expression shifted, resistance giving way to something that looked like relief. Like maybe she'd been waiting for someone to set boundaries that protected her instead of confined her. "I promise," she said. "Thank you." He stood, took her empty bowl. "Now you're going to sit there while I finish making dinner, and you're going to rest like you should have been doing all along." "Ethan, I can—" "Sit." The command came out rougher than intended, and he saw her whole body tense, saw fear flicker across her face before she could hide it. He'd barked at her like a sergeant at a private, and she'd responded like someone used to orders backed by threat. Ethan immediately gentled his voice. "Please, just sit. Let me take care of dinner. You've done enough today." The fear faded, replaced by confusion, like she couldn't quite reconcile the harsh tone with the kind words that followed. But she settled back into the rocking chair, and Ethan went to work at the stove, hyper-aware of her watching him. He wasn't a great cook, but he could manage basics. He made fried potatoes and onions, eggs scrambled with cheese, bread toasted with butter. Simple food, but filling and rich with the fat and protein she clearly needed. They ate in silence, and Ethan made sure to serve her generous portions, made sure she saw him doing it, made sure she understood that abundance was allowed here. When they finished, Lydia tried to stand to clean up, but Ethan waved her back down. "I've got it. You rest." "I've been resting all afternoon." "Then rest some more, read a book, stare at the wall. I don't care, just don't work." "I don't have a book." Ethan paused mid-scrub. "None at all?" "I had to leave everything behind when I came here, and before that," she shrugged. Reading was considered idleness, wasteful. Another mark against her dead husband. Another crime in a list Ethan suspected was far longer than what he'd heard. "I've got some books," he said. "Not many, but you're welcome to them. Top shelf in the bedroom, your bedroom. Help yourself." Later, after the dishes were done and evening settled full and dark around the ranch, Ethan found Lydia curled in the rocking chair with one of his books, a collection of Longfellow's poems worn soft from his mother's constant reading. She looked up when he approached, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she looked peaceful. Not happy, maybe, but peaceful. "Any good?" he asked, nodding at the book. "Beautiful," she said softly. "I'd forgotten how beautiful words could be when you're allowed to enjoy them." Something in Ethan's chest cracked open, just a hairline fracture, but enough to let warmth seep through. "Keep it as long as you want," he said. "Keep all of them, if they bring you peace." The days grew shorter as September gave way to October. The ranch prepared for winter, wood split and stacked, supplies laid in, animals moved to closer pastures. Ethan worked long hours trying to finish everything that needed finishing before the first real snow. Lydia worked alongside him when she could, learning the rhythms of ranch life with the same fierce determination she brought to everything. He taught her to feed the horses properly, how to collect eggs without agitating the hens, where the best kindling could be found near the tree line. And slowly, incrementally, he saw her begin to relax. Not completely. The wariness never fully left her eyes, and loud noises still made her jump. But she began to take up more space in the house, to leave small, personal touches scattered around. A jar of dried flowers on the table, a shawl draped over the back of the rocking chair, books stacked beside the bed she now thought of as truly hers. She also began to ask questions about Ethan's past, his time in the cavalry, how he'd ended up on this particular piece of Wyoming territory. They talked over dinner, over coffee, in the early mornings, during the brief rest periods when they'd both stop work and just exist together in the autumn sunshine. "Why here?" Lydia asked one evening, helping him curry the horses, a task she'd taken to with surprising skill. "Why this ranch, this place?" Ethan considered the question, running the brush down Soldier's flank in long, rhythmic strokes. "After the war, I couldn't stomach cities anymore. Too many people, too much noise. I needed space, silence. I needed to not be around folks who expected things from me." "What kinds of things?" "Heroism. Gratitude. The person I was before I left." He moved to work on a particularly stubborn tangle in the horse's mane. "War changes you. Everyone says they understand, but they don't. Not really. They want the boy who left, not the man who came back. After a while, it's easier to just be alone." Lydia was quiet for a moment, working her own brush through Penny's coat with careful attention. "I understand that, the wanting to be alone part. Easier to control your world when there's no one else in it." "Exactly. But lonely, too." "Yeah," Ethan admitted. "Lonely, too." They worked in companionable silence until the horses gleamed in the fading light, then walked back to the house together, their shoulders almost touching, but not quite. That night, Lydia spoke again as they cleaned up after dinner. "Can I ask you something?" "Course. Why did you agree to this? To me coming here? Tom's letter said he didn't ask your permission first, just arranged it. You could have turned me away, sent me back. Why didn't you?" Ethan dried a plate slowly, thinking. Honestly, I almost did. When I got that letter, I was furious. Thought about not even meeting the stage. But then I thought about what Tom said. That I was dying out here, just slower than a bullet. And I realized he was right. The ranch was becoming a tomb instead of a home. I was going through motions, not living, and I thought maybe, if someone else needed this place as much as I did, maybe we could both find something worth having. Have you found something worth having? He looked at her then, really looked. At the way lamplight caught the honey tones in her hair, the way she'd finally stopped holding herself like a prisoner awaiting sentence, the quiet strength that had been there all along but was only now becoming visible. Yeah, he said quietly. I think I have. Lydia's breath caught, and for a moment something electric hummed in the space between them. Then she looked away, breaking the moment, but Ethan saw color rise in her cheeks. I should turn in, she said, voice carefully neutral. Early start tomorrow. Sleep well. You too. But Ethan lay awake long that night, thinking about the way Lydia's eyes had gone soft when he'd said he'd found something worth having, thinking about how proximity and routine could build something that felt dangerously close to intimacy, thinking about all the ways this could become complicated. He'd promised her space and safety, promised no pressure and no expectations. And he meant it. Would keep meaning it, even if somewhere along the way his feelings had started shifting from duty to something altogether more personal. The morning came cold and bright, frost thick on everything. Lydia was already up when Ethan emerged from the lean-to, and she'd made oatmeal rich with cream and honey, coffee strong enough to strip paint. Eat, she said, echoing his words from days before, and pushed a full bowl toward him with a smile that made something in his chest do complicated things. They ate together as dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, and Ethan thought that maybe, just maybe, they were both learning how to do this, how to share space and time and tentative trust without the weight of past damage crushing what was trying to grow between them. It wouldn't be easy. Lydia still carried wounds that would take years to fully heal, and Ethan knew his own scars ran deep. But sitting there in the kitchen warm with lamplight and the smell of breakfast, watching this woman who'd come to him broken begin to piece herself back together, he felt something he hadn't felt since before the war. He felt like the future might actually be worth looking forward to. And that, Ethan thought, was no small miracle. The next weeks passed in a blur of preparation and work. Winter was coming, everyone could feel it in the changing quality of light, in the way animals moved with increased urgency, in the bite of wind that promised snow soon. Ethan and Lydia worked together more now, the careful distance they'd maintained beginning to ease into something more natural. She helped him stack wood, learning where to place her hands on the axe when he showed her how to split smaller pieces. He helped her preserve the last of the garden harvest, following her directions on canning and storing with a humility that made her smile. You're a quick study, she observed one afternoon, watching him carefully pack turnips in sand for the root cellar. Had a good teacher. The compliment seemed to please her, and Ethan filed that away. Lydia responded to genuine praise, especially about her competence. It made sense. She'd probably spent years being told she wasn't good enough, wasn't doing things right. Being acknowledged for her skills mattered. But despite the growing ease between them, Ethan could still see the strain. Lydia pushed herself too hard, always trying to do more, be more useful, prove her value. And some days, her body simply wouldn't cooperate. He found her sitting on the back steps one afternoon, face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Lydia? He approached carefully, like he would a spooked horse. What's wrong? Are you hurt? I'm useless, she said, voice muffled. I can't even get through a full day without falling apart. You should send me back. I'm not worth the trouble. Ethan's heart clenched. He lowered himself to sit beside her, close but not touching, and spoke with quiet intensity. You're not useless. You're recovering from years of mistreatment. That takes time. And you're not trouble. You're my wife, and you belong here, and I'm not sending you anywhere unless you want to go. But I can't. Can't what? Keep up some impossible standard you've set for yourself. Nobody's asking you to. I'm certainly not. He waited until she looked at him, her eyes red and face blotchy. Lydia, listen to me. You don't have to earn your place here every single day. You've already earned it. You're here. That's enough. It doesn't feel like enough. I know. But feelings lie sometimes, especially when they've been trained by bad circumstances. The truth is you make this place better just by being in it. The house feels like a home now. I eat real food instead of hardtack. I have someone to talk to at the end of the day. Those things matter. You matter. Not because of what you do, but because of who you are. Lydia stared at him with something like wonder, like he'd said something profound instead of just basic human decency. And maybe, Ethan thought with a flash of anger at her dead husband, maybe that was profound to her. Maybe kindness had been so scarce in her life that it felt extraordinary. "Thank you," she whispered. "Nothing to thank me for, just stating facts." He stood, offered her his hand. "Come on, let's go inside. I'll make coffee, and you can tell me more about which books you've been reading. Fair trade." She took his hand, the first time she'd voluntarily touched him, and let him pull her to her feet. Her fingers were small and cold in his, and Ethan had to resist the urge to hold on longer than necessary. Inside, they sat together drinking coffee while Lydia told him about the novel she'd found on his shelf, some adventure story about sailing ships and distant islands. She talked more animatedly than he'd ever seen, her hands moving to illustrate points, her eyes bright with engagement. And Ethan thought that this quiet afternoon of coffee and conversation was worth more than all the lonely silence he'd endured before she came. That night, a storm rolled in from the north, bringing the first real taste of winter. Wind howled around the ranch buildings, rain hammering the roof in waves. Ethan lay in his lean-to, listening to the storm and thinking he should probably start work on that second room in earnest. The lean-to was barely weatherproof, and winter storms would be far worse than this. He was just drifting off when he heard it, a cry from inside the house, sharp and frightened. Ethan was up and moving before conscious thought, crossing the distance between the lean-to and the main house in seconds. He burst through the door to find Lydia's bedroom door open, lamplight spilling out. She was sitting up in bed, breathing hard, eyes wide and unfocused. Nightmare. She was caught in a nightmare. "Lydia!" he called from the doorway, not wanting to startle her further by approaching. "Lydia, you're safe. You're at the ranch. You're safe." Her eyes found his, and he watched awareness slowly return. She took a shuddering breath, another, then buried her face in her hands. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to wake you. You didn't do anything wrong." Ethan stayed in the doorway, giving her space. "Bad dream?" She nodded, not looking up. "Want to talk about it?" "No, yes, I don't know." Her voice broke. "He was here. In the dream. He was here and he was alive and he said I belonged to him and I could never leave and—" She cut off, shaking too hard to continue. "He's not here," Ethan said firmly. "He's dead. He can't hurt you anymore. And even if he wasn't dead, I'd never let him touch you. You understand? You're under my protection now. That means something." Lydia looked at him then, searchingly. "You'd really protect me? From someone like him?" "With my life." The certainty in his voice seemed to reach her. Some of the terror drained from her face, replaced by exhaustion. "Do you want me to stay?" Ethan asked. "I can sit in the main room, just so you're not alone." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I'm asking if you want me to." She considered, then nodded. "Please." Ethan grabbed a blanket and settled into the rocking chair in the main room, positioning it so he could see her doorway. Lydia left her door ajar, and he could hear her settling back down, the rustle of blankets, the long exhale as she tried to relax. The storm continued its assault on the ranch, but inside the house felt safe, protected. Ethan dozed in the chair, waking periodically to listen for sounds of distress. But Lydia slept quiet, and when dawn finally came gray and cold, he felt the peculiar satisfaction of having kept watch through the night. She found him still in the chair when she emerged for breakfast, and something passed between them. Gratitude, trust, the wordless acknowledgement that they'd crossed some threshold together in the dark. "Thank you," she said simply. "Any time." And he meant it. Would spend every night in that uncomfortable chair if it meant she could sleep without fear, could rest without nightmares dragging her back to a past she'd barely escaped. The days continued their march toward winter, and Ethan and Lydia continued their careful dance toward something neither could quite name yet, but both could feel building like pressure before a storm. The first snow came in early November, 3 days of steady falling that blanketed the ranch in white silence. Ethan worked overtime to ensure the animals had shelter and feed, that the house had enough wood stacked close, that all the preparations he'd been making would hold against what promised to be a brutal winter. Lydia watched the snow fall with an expression Ethan couldn't quite read. Not fear, exactly, but something close to it. She stood at the window for long stretches, arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the white expanse like it was a wall closing in. "You all right?" he asked on the second day, coming in from feeding the horses to find her in the same spot she'd been an hour before. "I've never seen this much snow," she said softly. "Where I lived before, we got some, but nothing like this. It just keeps coming. This is nothing. Wait till January. We'll get storms that pile drifts higher than the roof." She turned to look at him, genuine alarm in her eyes. "How do you survive that?" "Preparation, which we've done, and patience, which we'll learn together." He stomped snow off his boots, hung his coat by the door. "We've got enough food for months, enough wood to keep us warm, and the animals are secured. We'll be fine." "What if we're not? What if something goes wrong?" Ethan heard the edge of panic in her voice and understood this wasn't really about snow. This was about control, about being trapped, about all the ways her previous life had taught her that walls closing in meant danger. "Then we deal with it together," he said, crossing to stand near her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his presence as solid and real. "Lydia, I've survived winters out here before. I know what I'm doing, and now there's two of us, which makes us twice as capable. We're not trapped. We're safe. There's a difference." She nodded, but he could see she didn't quite believe it yet. The snow continued to fall, and the world continued to shrink to just the ranch, just the house, just the two of them in an increasingly small space. By the third day, the snow finally stopped, leaving everything transformed. The ranch looked like something from a fairy tale, beautiful and pristine and utterly isolated. The road to town had disappeared under 3 feet of accumulation. They wouldn't be going anywhere for a while. Ethan found Lydia in the kitchen that afternoon, staring at their dwindling supply of fresh vegetables with an expression of intense concentration. "What's wrong?" "I'm trying to figure out how to make what we have last. The potatoes are fine, and the preserved goods will keep, but the fresh things—" She gestured at the small pile of carrots and turnips. "I should have been more careful, should have planned better." "We have plenty, more than enough." "But what if—" "Lydia." He waited until she looked at him. "Stop. We're fine. You've done an amazing job with the food, better than I ever managed on my own. There's nothing to worry about." "There's always something to worry about." The bleak certainty in her voice hit him hard. This was how she'd learned to survive, by constant vigilance, by anticipating disaster, by never letting her guard down. "Come here," Ethan said, making a decision. "I want to show you something." He led her to the root cellar, lit a lamp, and gestured at the shelves lined with preserved goods, the bins of potatoes and turnips, the hanging bundles of dried herbs, the crocks of salted meat. "You did this. In 2 months, you took my pathetic excuse for food storage and turned it into this. We could survive 6 months on what's here, maybe more. You've already ensured we'll make it through winter with food to spare, so please stop punishing yourself for imaginary failures." Lydia moved along the shelves, touching jars with something like wonder. "I did do this, didn't I?" "You absolutely did." She turned to face him in the lamplight, and something had shifted in her expression. Pride, maybe, or the beginning of it. "Thank you for showing me this, for reminding me. Anytime you forget how capable you are, I'll remind you again." They stood in the cool dimness of the root cellar, the preserved evidence of her work surrounding them, and Ethan felt that dangerous electricity again, that pull toward her that he'd been carefully controlling for weeks. Lydia felt it too. He could see it in the way her breath quickened, in how she swayed slightly toward him before catching herself. "We should go back inside," she said, voice unsteady. "It's cold down here." Yeah, we should." But neither of them moved for a long moment, and when they finally did, climbing back up to the house, something had changed. The air between them felt charged, expectant, like the stillness before a summer storm. That night, the temperature plummeted. Ethan woke, shivering in the lean-to, his breath visible in the air, frost forming on the inside of the walls. The small stove he'd rigged out here was no match for this kind of cold. He lay there debating, knowing he should get up and add more wood, knowing he should probably just accept that the lean-to wasn't suitable for deep winter and move his things into the main house. But that felt like crossing a line, like changing the careful boundaries they'd established. The decision was taken from him when the lean-to door opened and Lydia appeared, wrapped in a shawl, lamplight behind her. "Ethan, are you all right?" "Fine, just cold." "You're freezing. I can see your breath from here." She stepped into the small space, her expression troubled. "This is ridiculous. You can't sleep out here in this temperature. You'll freeze to death." "I'll manage." "No, you won't. And I won't have your death on my conscience because you're too stubborn to sleep in your own house." Her voice had gone firm, brooking no argument. "Get your things. You're moving inside." "Lydia, now, Ethan, please." The please did it. He gathered his bedroll and few belongings and followed her into the warmth of the main house. The contrast was immediate and overwhelming. The potbelly stove radiated heat, making the whole space comfortable, livable. "You can take the second room," Lydia said, then paused. "Except there is no second room, is there?" "Not really. Not one that's fit for sleeping." "I'll make do on the floor out here." "That's almost as bad as the lean-to." She wrapped her arms around herself, clearly struggling with something. Finally, she spoke in a rush. "Take the bedroom, the real one. I'll sleep out here." "Absolutely not." "Ethan, no. That's your room, your space. I'm not taking it from you." They stared at each other in the lamplight, locked in a stalemate of mutual stubbornness. "Then we share it," Lydia said finally, and Ethan's heart stuttered. Not like that. But it's the warmest room, and the bed is big enough for two people to sleep without touching. We can put pillows between us if you want. We're both adults. We can manage one night without making it strange." "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable." "I'm sure. And honestly, I'll feel worse knowing you're out here freezing than I will sharing space for one night." Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to insist there must be another solution, but the truth was he was cold to his bones and the thought of actual warmth was almost overwhelming. "All right," he agreed, "but any time you want me to leave, just say the word." They arranged the bedroom with careful attention to propriety. Lydia on one side, a row of pillows down the middle like a border, Ethan's bedroll on the other side. It was awkward and formal and absolutely necessary given the fragile trust between them. Ethan lay in the darkness, hyper-aware of Lydia's breathing just feet away, trying not to think about how strange this was, how intimate despite all their precautions. "Ethan?" Her voice came soft through the dark. "Yeah?" "Thank you for respecting boundaries, for never making me feel like I owe you anything." "You don't owe me thanks for basic decency." "Maybe not, but I'm grateful anyway." A pause, then quieter. "I never thought I'd feel safe with a man again. But I do. With you. I wanted you to know that." Something enormous and fragile swelled in Ethan's chest. "I'm glad. That matters more than you know." They fell silent, and eventually Ethan heard Lydia's breathing even out into sleep. But he lay awake longer, thinking about trust and damage and the strange paths that brought two broken people together in the Wyoming wilderness. One night became 2, then 3. The cold snap held, making the lean-to uninhabitable. Neither of them suggested Ethan move back out, and gradually the awkwardness faded into routine. They'd lie on opposite sides of the pillow wall, talking quietly until sleep claimed them, sharing space with a careful respect that somehow made the intimacy bearable. Ethan learned things about Lydia in those darkness conversations, about her childhood on a struggling farm, about losing her mother young, about the desperation that had led her into marriage with a man she barely knew who turned out to be a monster. And Lydia learned about him, about the war, about watching friends die, about coming home to find his parents gone and the world smaller and meaner than when he'd left. "I thought the war was the worst thing I'd ever experienced," Ethan said one night, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. "Turns out the after was worse, the silence, the emptiness, not knowing who I was if I wasn't a soldier anymore." Is that why you came out here, to figure that out? Maybe. Or maybe just to hide from having to figure it out. He rolled onto his side, facing the pillow wall. What about you? After your husband died, why didn't you just start over somewhere? Why agree to come here? Lydia was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Because I was scared. Because his family blamed me for his death, said I'd distracted him, caused the accident somehow. His brother Calvin, he started coming around, making threats, saying I still belonged to the Rourke family, saying there were debts to pay. Her breath hitched. I couldn't stay there. Had nowhere to go. When Tom Halloran found me through a mutual friend and offered this arrangement, it felt like the only way out that didn't end with me dead in a ditch somewhere. Rage, cold and sharp, lanced through Ethan. This brother, Calvin, he hurt you? He tried. I got away. Mostly. Mostly? It doesn't matter now. I'm here. He doesn't know where here is. But it did matter. It mattered tremendously. Ethan made a mental note to write Tom, get more information about this Calvin Rourke, understand exactly what threat might still be lurking out there. If he ever shows up here, Ethan said quietly, I'll handle it. You understand? You're under my protection. He comes near you. He deals with me. You can't promise that. You don't know what he's like. I don't need to. I know what I'm like when someone threatens what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice surprised even him, but he didn't take it back. You're my wife, Lydia. Maybe not in truth yet, but in law and in spirit. That means something. That means I'll protect you with everything I have. He felt rather than saw her turn toward him in the darkness. Why? Why would you do that for someone you barely know? Because I know enough. I know you're brave and kind and stronger than you think. I know you've survived things that would have broken lesser people. I know that having you here has made this ranch feel like a home for the first time in years. And I know... He stopped, swallowed hard. I know that somewhere along the way, this stopped being just an arrangement and became something real, at least for me. The silence stretched so long and thin that Ethan thought he'd miscalculated badly, had said too much too soon, had broken the fragile thing growing between them. Then Lydia's hand appeared over the pillow wall, pale and small in the darkness, reaching for him. Ethan took it carefully, his larger hand engulfing hers, and felt her fingers grip tight. For me, too, she whispered. It became real for me, too. They lay like that, hands clasped across the pillow barrier, until sleep finally claimed them both. And when Ethan woke in the gray pre-dawn, their hands were still intertwined, Lydia's breathing soft and steady beside him. Something had shifted in the night. Some wall had come down. And though Ethan knew there was still a long road ahead, still damage to heal and trust to build, he felt hope bloom fierce and bright in his chest. The storm that had been building between them was finally here, and he was ready to weather it. The days that followed were different, softer. Lydia touched him more. Small things, casual things, her hand on his arm when she passed him something, her shoulder brushing his when they worked side by side. Ethan reciprocated carefully, always giving her time to pull away, always respecting her space. But she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned in. They still slept with the pillow wall between them, but now they'd talk for hours in the darkness, sharing stories and fears and hopes they'd never spoken aloud before. Lydia told him about the worst of her marriage, the violence, the isolation, the systematic destruction of her sense of self. He'd tell me I was worthless, she said one night, voice steady despite the horror of what she described. That I was lucky he'd taken me because no one else would want something so damaged and useless. He'd go days without speaking to me, then explode over nothing. Break things. She stopped, redirected. He broke my arm once. Told the doctor I'd fallen. I believed for a long time that I deserved it. That if I could just be better, do better, he'd stop. Ethan's jaw ached from clenching it. You didn't deserve any of it. You know that now, right? My head knows it. My heart's still learning. Then I'll keep reminding you until your heart catches up. She rolled toward him then, and in the faint moonlight coming through the window, he could see her face, beautiful and sad and hopeful all at once. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything. Why haven't you kissed me? The question landed like a thunderclap in the quiet room. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. Because I promised not to touch you without permission. Because I didn't want to pressure you. He struggled for words. Because I didn't know if you were ready, if you'd ever be ready, and that would be all right. I meant what I said about this being real, regardless. Lydia studied his face in the darkness. What if I said I was ready? What if I said I wanted you to? Then I'd ask if you were sure, really sure. Not because you feel obligated or think you should, but because you actually want it. I'm sure. Her voice was steady, certain. I want this. Want you. I'm tired of letting fear rule every decision I make. I'm tired of him still having power over me, even from the grave. I want to choose something for myself. And I choose you. Ethan's breath caught. Lydia. Kiss me, Ethan. Please. He moved the pillows aside slowly, giving her time to change her mind, time to pull back, but she didn't. Instead, she moved toward him, closing the distance that had separated them all these weeks. When their lips met, it was gentle, questioning, tentative, both of them terrified of doing this wrong. But then Lydia made a small sound in the back of her throat and leaned closer, and Ethan's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. The kiss deepened slowly, carefully, Ethan following her lead, letting her set the pace. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Lydia's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Okay? Ethan asked, searching her face for any sign of regret or fear. More than okay. She pressed her forehead to his. That was what it's supposed to feel like, isn't it? Like a choice, like something good. Yeah, that's exactly what it's supposed to feel like. They lay together in the darkness, Lydia's head on Ethan's chest, his arm around her shoulders, and talked until dawn about everything and nothing. About the future they might build together, about the family they might want someday, about all the ordinary, extraordinary things that came with choosing to love someone despite damage and fear, and all the reasons it might be easier not to. I'm scared, Lydia admitted as the sky began to lighten outside. I'm scared I'm too broken for this, that I'll ruin it somehow. You're not broken. You're healing. There's a difference. Ethan pressed a kiss to her hair. And you couldn't ruin this if you tried. We'll figure it out together, one day at a time. That's all we can do. Promise? Promise. The next days were a revelation. They moved through the ranch work with new ease, new intimacy. Ethan would pull Lydia close when they passed in the kitchen, steal kisses when she handed him coffee, hold her hand across the table during meals. And Lydia bloomed under the attention, smiling more, laughing sometimes, letting herself be loved without constantly waiting for punishment to follow. But old fears died hard. Ethan noticed how she'd still tense sometimes when he moved too quickly, how she'd apologize reflexively when she made the smallest mistake, how she still ate like food might be taken away at any moment. We've got time, he reminded her when he caught her berating herself for burning toast. Nobody's grading you. Nobody's keeping score. I know, it's hard to break habits that kept me alive for so long. Then we'll break them together, slowly, until you believe deep down that you're safe here. Winter deepened around them, and the ranch became their entire world. Just the two of them, and the animals, and the endless white expanse of snow. They were snowed in for days at a stretch, forced into even closer proximity, and instead of feeling trapped, Lydia found herself grateful for it. This was what safety felt like. This quiet domesticity, this gentle routine, this man who touched her like she was precious instead of property. One night in mid-December, as they lay tangled together in the bed that had become truly theirs, Lydia spoke into the darkness. I think I'm falling in love with you. Ethan's hand stilled where it had been tracing lazy patterns on her back. You think, or you know? I know, I'm not sure I know what love is supposed to feel like. Everything I thought was love before turned out to be chains, but this? She pressed her palm over his heart, feeling it beat steady and strong. This feels different, like freedom instead of prison, like choosing instead of being chosen. That's exactly what love is, Ethan said softly. And for what it's worth, I'm falling too. Have been since you first stepped off that stage, looking like you'd fight the whole world if it tried to hurt you again. Lydia laughed, the sound watery with tears. I was terrified. Terrified and fierce, scared and brave. You contained multitudes that day, and you still do. They made love for the first time that night, slow and careful and infinitely tender. Ethan watched her face constantly, checking for any sign of fear or pain, ready to stop at a word. But Lydia met his gaze steadily, her hands in his hair, her breath coming fast as she chose him, chose pleasure over pain for the first time in her life. Afterward, she cried, not from sadness, but from relief, from release, from the overwhelming realization that her body could feel good things, that intimacy could be about connection instead of conquest. I've got you, Ethan murmured, holding her close as she shook. You're safe. You're loved. I've got you. And Lydia believed him. Against all odds, despite all her experience said men couldn't be trusted, she believed him. The winter storm that hit 3 days before Christmas was unlike anything Ethan had seen in his years on the ranch. The wind howled like a living thing, driving snow sideways, piling drifts that buried fences and threatened to cave in the barn roof. They worked in shifts to keep the animals safe, breaking ice on water troughs, distributing feed, checking for injuries or distress. Ethan did most of the outside work, but Lydia insisted on helping where she could, holding the lantern while he worked, passing tools, being another set of hands when he needed them. On the second day of the storm, fighting their way back from the barn, Lydia stumbled in a drift and went down hard. Ethan pulled her up immediately, but when they got inside, she was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Hot bath, Ethan ordered, already heating water. Now, before you freeze solid. He filled the tub they kept by the stove, helped her strip off her frozen layers, and turned his back to give her privacy while she climbed in. But Lydia reached for him. Stay, please. I don't want to be alone. So Ethan sat on the floor beside the tub, his back against the wall, and talked to her while she thawed, about everything and nothing, keeping her mind off the cold still deep in her bones. This storm's bad, Lydia said, once she could speak without her teeth chattering. Worse than the others. Yeah, but we're prepared. We'll ride it out. What if someone needs help? What if there's trouble in town? Then they'll handle it until the storm clears and we can check. That's how it works out here. You do what you can, accept what you can't, and trust your neighbors to do the same. Lydia was quiet for a moment, then said softly, I'm glad I'm here. With you. Not somewhere else waiting for this to be over. Me too. The storm raged for 3 more days, but inside the ranch house, Ethan and Lydia built a world apart from it. They cooked together, read together, made love by firelight, and talked about the future they were building one careful day at a time. On Christmas Eve, as the storm finally began to ease, Lydia gave Ethan a gift. A shirt she'd sewn in secret from fabric she'd found in his mother's trunk, carefully mended and made to fit him perfectly. I didn't have money for store-bought, she said, suddenly shy. But I wanted you to have something. It's perfect. Ethan pulled her close, overwhelmed by the care that had gone into every stitch. Thank you. I have something for you too, he added, and retrieved a small wooden box from the shelf where he'd hidden it. Inside was a ring, simple silver, sized to fit her finger, carved with a delicate pattern of leaves and flowers. Ethan had spent hours on it in the barn, working the metal with tools he'd learned to use during the war. I know we're already married on paper, he said, as Lydia stared at the ring with wide eyes. But this felt important, a symbol of choice, not just arrangement. If you'll have it. If I'll... Lydia's voice broke. Ethan, of course I'll have it. Of course I will. He slipped it onto her finger and they kissed in the firelight while outside the storm finally died, leaving the world pristine and new and full of possibility. That night, wrapped in each other's arms, Lydia spoke the truth that had been growing in her heart for weeks. I love you, not falling anymore. Just love completely. I love you too, Ethan replied, more than I thought I could love anything. And in that moment, in that small ranch house buried in Wyoming snow, 2 people who'd started as strangers became truly married, not by law or arrangement, but by choice and courage, and the stubborn decision to build something beautiful from broken pieces. The storm had passed, the The walls had come down. And what remained was simply love, real and hard-won, and absolutely worth the fight to find it. January came bitter and unforgiving, the kind of cold that made bones ache and breath freeze in the air. But inside the ranch house, warmth persisted, both from the fire and from the love that had taken root between Ethan and Lydia, like something wild and necessary. They'd fallen into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Mornings began tangled together in bed, Ethan waking to find Lydia's head on his chest, her hand curled over his heart. Evenings ended the same way, after days spent working the ranch side by side, learning each other's movements and moods with the intimacy of true partnership. Lydia had changed in ways both subtle and profound. She smiled more readily now, laughed without covering her mouth in shame, ate full portions without that haunted look of someone expecting food to be weaponized against them. The nightmares still came sometimes, but less frequently, and when they did, Ethan was there to pull her back to safety. She was healing, slowly, imperfectly, but healing nonetheless. It was mid-January when Lydia realized she'd missed her monthly courses. She said nothing at first, telling herself it meant nothing, that the stress of adjustment and the physical demands of ranch life had simply disrupted her body's rhythms. But when another week passed and still nothing came, she couldn't ignore the possibility blooming in her mind like spring flowers through snow. She might be pregnant. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. A baby, Ethan's baby. The physical proof that love could create something beautiful instead of just leaving scars. But what if her body couldn't carry it? What if years of malnutrition and abuse had damaged her beyond repair? What if she lost the child and disappointed Ethan in the process? The fears spiraled, and Lydia kept them to herself for another week, watching her body for signs, trying to interpret every twinge and flutter. Finally, on a Sunday morning when fresh snow was falling soft and silent outside, she told him. They were having breakfast, the comfortable quiet of people who didn't need constant conversation to feel connected, when Lydia set down her coffee and spoke. "Ethan, I need to tell you something." The seriousness in her tone made him look up immediately, concern flickering across his features. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least I don't think it is. She twisted the ring on her finger, the one he'd made for her, gathering courage. "I think I might be pregnant." Ethan went completely still, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his mouth. For a long moment, he just stared at her, and Lydia's heart sank. He didn't want this. It was too soon, too much, too complicated. Then his face broke into the widest smile she'd ever seen, pure joy transforming his features into something radiant. We're... He set down the cup with shaking hands and crossed to her, pulling her up from her chair and into his arms. "Lydia, are you sure?" "Not completely, but I'm late, very late. And I've been feeling strange, different." She pulled back to search his face. "You're happy about this?" "Happy? He seemed unable to find words adequate to the feeling. "I'm beyond happy, terrified, yes, completely unprepared, absolutely, but happy in ways I didn't know I could be." Relief flooded through Lydia so powerfully her knees went weak. "I was afraid you'd think it was too soon, that we weren't ready." "Is anyone ever ready for something like this?" Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones with infinite gentleness. "But we'll figure it out, together, just like everything else. What if something goes wrong? What if my body can't do this? Then we'll deal with that if it comes. But right now, in this moment, we celebrate the possibility. We choose hope over fear." He pressed his forehead to hers. "A baby, Lydia, our baby. That's a miracle, no matter what happens next." Tears spilled down Lydia's cheeks, and she let them fall. Let herself feel the full weight of joy and terror and hope all tangled together. Ethan held her while she cried, and when she finally pulled back, he was crying too. "We should see the doctor," he said, practical even through emotion. "Make sure everything's all right. Make sure you're getting what you need. The roads won't be clear for weeks yet." Then as soon as they are, first possible moment, he placed his hand carefully on her still flat stomach. "In the meantime, you rest more, eat more. Let me handle the heavy work. I'm not an invalid. I know, but you're carrying something precious, and I'll be damned if I let anything jeopardize that. Humor me. Lydia smiled despite herself. Fine, but I'm not spending the next month sitting idle. I'll go mad. Not idle, just careful. There's a difference. The days that followed were suffused with a new kind of joy. Ethan treated Lydia like she was made of spun glass, constantly fussing and worrying until she had to physically push him away and remind him she was still capable of basic tasks. But beneath the annoyance was gratitude that someone cared this much, that someone thought her and the life she carried were worth protecting. She continued to work the garden, planning for spring planting even though snow still covered everything. She sewed baby clothes from fabric scraps, tiny garments that seemed impossibly small. She read everything Ethan had about pregnancy and childbirth, preparing herself as much as possible for what lay ahead. And she let herself dream. About a child with Ethan's steady strength and her determination. About teaching them to plant gardens and ride horses and be kind in a world that often wasn't. About building a family from nothing, from two broken people who'd found each other against all odds. It was a good dream, a dream worth protecting. The first sign of trouble came in late February, when the roads finally cleared enough for occasional traffic. Ethan rode into town for supplies they needed before the baby came. Medical items, fabric, things that would be harder to get later. He returned late afternoon, his face grim. "What's wrong?" Lydia asked immediately, reading his expression. Ethan dismounted slowly, tied the horse, and turned to face her with obvious reluctance. "I ran into Sam Porter at the general store. He said there's been a man asking questions around town. Stranger. Described you pretty accurately. Asked if anyone knew where the widow Rourke had gone." The blood drained from Lydia's face. "Calvin?" That's what I figured. Ethan's jaw was tight with barely controlled anger. Sam said he told the man he'd never heard of anyone by that name. "But Lydia, if he's looking for you, if he's come this far..." "He won't stop until he finds me." Lydia's voice came out flat, all the joy of the past weeks evaporating in an instant. "He never stops. He's like his brother that way, relentless." Ethan pulled her into his arms, and Lydia let herself take comfort there, even as fear clawed at her throat. "He's not getting near you. I meant what I said about protection. You don't know what he's capable of." "Then you'll tell me everything, so I can be prepared." Inside, over coffee neither of them wanted, Lydia told Ethan the full story of Calvin Rourke, about how he'd appeared after her husband's death, claiming she owed the family for years of care, about the night he'd cornered her in her own home, hands around her throat, telling her she belonged to the Rourkes until they said otherwise. "I fought him off," she said, unconsciously rubbing her throat where scars still lingered. "Hit him with a fireplace poker. Got away. But he swore he'd find me. Swore I'd pay for what I'd done, both the supposed debt and for daring to fight back." "How long ago was this?" 4 months before I came here. I ran, changed my name back to Moore. Stayed with friends who hid me until Tom Halloran made contact. Ethan's hands were shaking with rage. "He put hands on you, tried to kill you." "Yes. And now he's tracked you here." Ethan stood, paced the small kitchen like a caged animal. "All right, we prepare. I'll ride the property line, make sure everything's secure. We keep the rifle loaded. You stay armed when I'm not in the house." "Ethan, you can't fight him. He's dangerous in ways you don't understand. He doesn't fight fair, doesn't follow rules." "Neither do I, when it comes to protecting what's mine." He stopped pacing, looked at her with eyes gone hard and cold, a soldier's eyes, not the gentle man she'd come to know. "He wants to hurt you? He goes through me. And I promise you, Lydia, that's not a fight he'll win." The certainty in his voice should have comforted her, but Lydia had learned not to underestimate men like Calvin Rourke. They were survivors, cruel and cunning, willing to do anything to get what they wanted, and what Calvin wanted was her suffering. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. The ranch was quiet save for the normal rhythms of late winter. Ethan remained on alert, checking locks obsessively, keeping weapons close, watching the horizon like he expected an army to appear. Lydia tried to maintain normalcy, but fear had taken root again, poisoning the peace she'd found. She jumped at shadows, saw threats in every unfamiliar sound. The nightmares returned with a vengeance. pulling her back to that night with Calvin's hands around her throat, his breath hot on her face as he told her all the ways he'd make her pay. "He's not coming," Ethan said one night, finding her at the window staring out into darkness. "It's been 2 weeks. Maybe he moved on. Maybe Sam convinced him you weren't here. Or maybe he's watching, waiting for the right moment." Lydia wrapped her arms around herself, around the small life growing inside her. "That's what he does. He's patient when it serves him. Then we're patient too. We wait, we watch, and we protect what matters." But patience ran out on a cold March morning when Ethan was checking the northern fence line and Lydia was alone in the house. She was kneading bread dough, lost in the familiar rhythm of the work, when the dogs started barking. Not their usual alert bark, but something more frantic, more urgent. Lydia's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window, peering out. A man stood in the yard, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same dark hair and cruel mouth as her dead husband. Calvin Rourke had found her. Terror froze Lydia in place for a precious moment. Then survival instinct kicked in and she ran for the rifle Ethan kept loaded by the door. Her hand shook as she grabbed it, checked the chamber like Ethan had taught her, positioned herself where she could see the door but had cover if needed. "I know you're in there, Lydia," Calvin's voice carried through the walls, familiar and hateful. "I've come a long way to collect what's mine. Be easier on both of us if you just come out peaceful." Lydia's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm not yours. I never was. Leave, Calvin, before this gets worse." His laugh was sharp and mean. "Worse for who? You're alone out here, girl. I've been watching. Your new husband's off playing cowboy. It's just you and me, and we both know how that ends. I'm armed. I will shoot you if you try to come in here." "You won't. You don't have it in you. You're weak. Always have been. That's why my brother had to keep you in line." Rage cut through Lydia's fear like a blade. "Your brother was a monster, and so are you. But I'm not the same woman you cornered 4 months ago. I'm not afraid anymore." "Liar." The door handle rattled. "You're terrified. I can hear it in your voice." Lydia raised the rifle, sighting down the barrel at the door. "Last warning, Calvin. Leave now or I shoot." "You're not going to—" The door exploded inward, wood splintering around the lock. Calvin filled the doorway, and Lydia saw murder in his eyes. She pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Calvin staggered back, clutching his shoulder, shock and pain replacing the predatory confidence on his face. "You shot me," he said, almost disbelieving. "You actually shot me." "I warned you." Lydia's hands were shaking so hard she could barely keep the rifle steady. "Leave. Now. Before I shoot you again." But Calvin's shock was transforming into rage. He pulled his own gun with his good hand, and Lydia knew she wouldn't get another shot off in time. Then Ethan was there, appearing behind Calvin like an avenging angel, his own rifle pressed to the back of Calvin's head. "Drop it," Ethan said, voice colder than Lydia had ever heard it. "Drop the gun or I paint this yard with your brains." Calvin froze, calculating odds. "This doesn't concern you." "The hell it doesn't. That's my wife you're threatening, my child she's carrying, my home you just forced your way into. Everything about this concerns me." Ethan's finger tightened on the trigger. "Last chance. Drop the gun." Calvin let his pistol fall to the ground, and Ethan immediately kicked it away, never taking his rifle off target. "Lydia, you all right?" Ethan called without looking away from Calvin. "I'm fine. I shot him in the shoulder." "Good. That was the right call." To Calvin, he said, "Get on your knees. Hands behind your head. You can't—" Ethan pressed the rifle harder against Calvin's skull. "I absolutely can. And I will. You came onto my property, threatened my wife, broke into my home. Law out here says I'd be well within my rights to kill you where you stand, so I strongly suggest you do exactly what I say." Calvin knelt, and Ethan quickly bound his hands with rope he'd grabbed from the barn when he'd heard the gunshot and come running. Only then did he look at Lydia, and his expression shifted from cold rage to desperate concern. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" "I'm fine. I'm okay." But now that the immediate danger had passed, Lydia was shaking so hard she could barely stand. "Ethan, I shot him. I actually shot someone." "You defended yourself. You did exactly right." Ethan secured Calvin thoroughly, then crossed to Lydia and gently took the rifle from her trembling hands. "You were so brave, so strong. I'm proud of you." Lydia collapsed against him, and Ethan held her while she shook, one hand in her hair, the other around her waist, murmuring reassurances. "What do we do with him?" she finally asked. "I'm riding to town, getting the sheriff. He'll take Calvin in, and we'll file charges for assault, breaking and entering, whatever sticks." Ethan pulled back to look at her face. He's not walking away from this. He's going to answer for what he did. What if he comes back? What if the law doesn't hold him? Then I'll make sure he never gets the chance to hurt you again. The promise in Ethan's voice was absolute. One way or another, this ends today. But as Ethan turned back to Calvin, the bound man was smiling, a terrible knowing smile that made Lydia's blood run cold. "You think this is over?" Calvin said, blood seeping through his shirt from where Lydia had shot him. "You think I came alone? I've got friends waiting. They know where I am. If I don't come back, you're lying," Ethan said flatly. "Am I? You willing to bet her life on that?" Ethan and Lydia exchanged glances, and Lydia saw the calculation in her husband's eyes. He didn't know if Calvin was bluffing. Neither did she, but they couldn't take the risk. "All right," Ethan said finally. "Here's how this plays out. I'm going to load you on a horse and take you far from here. You're going to tell me where your friends are, if they exist. And then you're going to disappear from Lydia's life permanently. You understand? And if I refuse, then I shoot you and take my chances with your imaginary friends." Ethan's voice held no bluff, no hesitation. "Your choice, Calvin. Leave with your life or die here. Either way, you lose." Calvin stared at Ethan for a long moment, then laughed bitterly. "You'd actually do it, kill a man in cold blood." "To protect her?" "Without hesitation. Don't mistake me for someone with soft edges. I've killed before. I'll do it again if necessary." Something in Ethan's tone must have convinced Calvin because the fight drained out of him. "Fine. There's no one else. I came alone. Couldn't afford to split the bounty." "What bounty?" Calvin's smile turned nasty. "The one I was going to collect when I dragged her back to sell to the highest bidder. Turns out desperate men will pay good money for a fresh woman, no questions asked. Widow with no family, no one to miss her? That's valuable merchandise." Lydia felt bile rise in her throat. He'd been planning to traffic her, to sell her like livestock to men who would... She couldn't finish the thought. Ethan's face had gone white with rage. "You sick son of a..." "What are you going to do about it?" Calvin taunted. "Kill me? You don't have it in you. You're too civilized, too bound by rules and laws, and..." The gunshot cracked through the air, and Calvin jerked backward, a new hole blooming red in his chest. He looked down at it in shock, then up at Lydia, who stood with Ethan's pistol smoking in her hand. "You were wrong," she said quietly. "I do have it in me. When someone threatens my family, when someone tries to take everything I've built, when someone thinks they can treat me like property, I have exactly what it takes." Calvin's eyes went glassy, and he slumped forward onto the frozen ground. Ethan stared at Lydia, at the gun in her hand, at the absolute certainty in her expression. Then he moved to her side, gently taking the pistol. "Is he..." Lydia couldn't finish. Ethan checked for a pulse, found none. "He's dead. I killed him." The words came out flat, factual. "You defended yourself, us, the baby." Ethan turned her to face him. "Lydia, look at me. You did what you had to do, what anyone would do in that situation. The law? The law will understand. He broke into our home, admitted to planning to abduct and sell you, threatened our lives." Ethan's hands framed her face. "We'll ride to town together. Tell the sheriff exactly what happened. It'll be all right." But Lydia was staring at her hands, at the blood spattered there from when she'd checked Calvin's pulse before Ethan had. "I'm not sorry. I should feel something. Guilt, horror, something. But all I feel is relief that he can't hurt us anymore." "Then that's what you feel. There's no right or wrong here, Lydia. Just survival." They stood in the yard for a long moment, the winter sun cold and bright overhead, Calvin's body a dark stain on the white snow. Then Ethan pulled Lydia close, and she buried her face in his chest and finally let herself shake. She'd killed a man, ended a life, crossed a line she'd never thought she'd cross. But she'd also protected her family, her future, the tiny life growing inside her. And given the choice again, she'd make the same decision without hesitation. The sheriff came the next day after Ethan rode to town and explained the situation. He looked over the scene, took statements, examined Calvin's body and the broken door and the evidence of forced entry. "Self-defense, he said finally. "Clear as day. Man breaks into your home, threatens your pregnant wife, admits to planning abduction and trafficking. You'd have been within your rights to kill him yourself, Cole. As it is, your wife defended herself. Can't fault her for that." "So there won't be charges?" Lydia asked, her voice small. "Against you?" "No, ma'am. Against the dead man, if he weren't already dead, there'd be plenty. But as it stands, this is closed." The sheriff tipped his hat. "I'm sorry you had to go through this, Mrs. Cole, but you did what needed doing. Don't let anyone tell you different." After the sheriff left, taking Calvin's body to be buried in the town cemetery, far from anywhere Lydia would ever have to see, Ethan and Lydia stood on the porch, watching the sun set over the snow-covered ranch. "It's really over," Lydia said softly. "He can't hurt me anymore. No one from that life can." "It's over," Ethan confirmed, his arm around her shoulders. "You're free, truly free." Lydia placed her hand over her stomach, where their child grew safe and protected. "We're free." That night, they held each other close in the darkness, both of them still processing what had happened, what it meant, how it changed them. "Does it make me a monster?" Lydia whispered. "That I don't regret killing him?" "No. It makes you human. It makes you a mother protecting her child, a woman who refused to be a victim anymore." Ethan pressed a kiss to her temple. "You're not a monster, Lydia. You're the strongest person I know. I couldn't have done it without you." "Without knowing you'd stand with me no matter what." "Always. Through anything. That's what love means." They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time in weeks, Lydia slept without nightmares. Calvin Rourke was dead. Her past was finally, truly buried. And the future, their future, stretched ahead full of possibility and hope and the promise of new life. The ranch was theirs. The life they were building was theirs. And no one would ever take that away again. Spring came tentatively to Wyoming that year, as if testing whether the land was ready to release winter's grip. Snow melted in patches, revealing brown grass that would soon turn green, and the air carried the promise of warmth, even when frost still silvered the mornings. Lydia's pregnancy progressed with a steadiness that felt like a miracle after everything they'd been through. Her body, so long denied proper nourishment and care, responded to gentle treatment with surprising resilience. She filled out in ways that had nothing to do with the baby. Her face lost its hollow quality, her arms gained strength, her eyes brightened with health she'd never known. Ethan watched her transform with quiet awe, this woman who'd arrived pale and frightened and had somehow become the strongest person he knew. She moved through the ranch with confidence now, no longer asking permission for every action, no longer apologizing for taking up space. The garden was hers, the kitchen was hers, the ranch itself was hers as much as his. "How are you feeling?" he asked one April morning, finding her in the garden plotting where vegetables would go once the ground fully thawed. "Enormous," Lydia said, one hand on her swelling belly. "And hungry, always hungry. This child eats more than both of us combined." "That's a good sign, means they're growing strong. Or preparing to eat us out of house and home the moment they arrive." But she was smiling as she said it, her whole face alight with joy that still seemed to surprise her when she felt it. Ethan knelt beside her, placing his hand over hers on her stomach. The baby kicked, a strong flutter against his palm, and something in his chest expanded impossibly. "Hello in there," he murmured. "We're getting ready for you. Your mama's planting gardens. I'm fixing up the cradle my father made. We're doing our best to make a world worth being born into." Lydia's eyes went bright with tears. She cried easily these days, overwhelmed by emotion in ways that embarrassed and pleased her in equal measure. "Read me what you wrote," she said, nodding toward the paper he'd been carrying when he came out. Ethan had started writing letters to their unborn child, recording thoughts and hopes and promises for the future. He'd never shared them with anyone, but Lydia had found them one day and asked if she could hear them. He unfolded the latest letter and read aloud, his voice roughened by emotion. Dear little one, today your mother planted the first seeds of the season. She says you'll be here before the tomatoes ripen, which seems impossible that something so important could happen so fast. I'm terrified, if I'm honest. Terrified I won't know how to be a father, that I'll fail you the way I feel like I failed everyone else I was supposed to protect. But then I look at your mother and see how far she's come from the frightened woman who stepped off that stage, and I think maybe we can do this. Maybe love is enough, even when everything else feels insufficient. We're going to try our best. That's all anyone can do. Lydia was crying openly now, and Ethan set the letter aside to pull her close, careful of her belly between them. That's beautiful, she whispered against his chest. This child is so lucky to have you as a father, to have this as their beginning. We're the lucky ones, getting to start over, getting to build something good from all the broken pieces. They stayed that way for a long time, kneeling in the garden dirt, holding each other while the morning sun climbed higher and the world around them slowly woke to spring. The months that followed were full of preparation and anticipation. Ethan finished the cradle, sanding it smooth and carving small flowers along the edges, the same pattern he'd put on Lydia's ring. Lydia sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her stitches getting more confident as her belly grew larger. They argued, gently, about names. Ethan wanted something strong and traditional. Lydia wanted something that meant hope or new beginning. They compromised on several options, deciding they'd know the right name when they saw the baby's face. What if we can't agree? Lydia asked one evening, working on a small blue jacket while Ethan repaired harnesses by lamplight. Then we'll do what we always do. Talk until we find common ground. Or flip a coin. He looked up with a grin. Though I should warn you, I'm very good at coin flipping. Won the regimental championship 3 years running. There's a regimental coin-flipping championship? There is when you're bored enough in camp. We got very creative with our competitions. Lydia laughed. The sound still new enough that it made Ethan's heart skip. She laughed often now, found joy in small things, allowed herself moments of pure happiness without waiting for punishment to follow. The nightmares had stopped almost entirely. Oh, she still had bad nights occasionally, still woke sometimes reaching for Ethan to confirm he was real and she was safe. But the screaming terrors that had plagued her early months on the ranch were gone, replaced by ordinary dreams and peaceful sleep. I've been thinking, Lydia said carefully one night as they lay in bed, her head on his chest, his hand tracing lazy circles on her stomach. About after the baby comes. About what we tell them, when they're old enough to ask. About what? About how we met, about Calvin, about the violence. She paused, gathering thoughts. I don't want to lie, but I also don't want to burden a child with darkness they're too young to understand. Ethan considered this. We tell them the truth, but we tailor it to their age. When they're small, we say we chose each other, which is true. We say we built this ranch together, which is also true. As they get older, we give them more context. We tell them about hard times and hard choices, and how people can survive terrible things and still build beautiful lives after. You think they'll understand? Not be ashamed of how their mother came here? I think they'll be proud. I think they'll look at you and see strength and courage, and someone who refused to stay broken. Ethan pressed a kiss to her hair. I know I do. Lydia was quiet for a moment, then said softly, I used to think my past defined me. That I'd always be the woman who was broken by cruel men. But you helped me see that I'm the woman who survived, who fought back, who built something new. That's who I want our child to know. That's who they will know. Because that's who you are. May brought warmer weather and the first real greening of the landscape. The garden Lydia had planned with such care began to sprout, neat rows of vegetables pushing through dark soil. The horses grew sleek on fresh grass, and the chickens produced eggs in abundance. The ranch thrived under their combined care, transformed from Ethan's lonely outpost into a true homestead. They'd added chickens and started plans for expanding the barn. Neighbors who'd regarded Ethan as a hermit started stopping by, curious about the woman who'd changed the coal place from silent and barren to alive with purpose. Lydia charmed them without trying, offering coffee and conversation, asking about their families and their own ranches. She was still shy sometimes, still cautious with strangers, but she'd learned to trust her instincts about people, and mostly, people proved trustworthy. Martha Henderson, whose ranch bordered theirs to the east, became a particular friend. She was a weathered woman in her 50s who'd raised 6 children on hard land and hard work, and she took one look at Lydia's swelling belly and appointed herself unofficial midwife. "You'll want help when the time comes," Martha said matter-of-factly over coffee one afternoon. "First babies can be tricky. I've birthed dozens, including all my own. I'll come when you need me." "I don't want to impose," Lydia said automatically, that old instinct to refuse help rising up. "It's not an imposition. It's what neighbors do." Martha fixed her with a knowing look. "You're not alone out here anymore, girl. You've got people now. Might as well get used to it." Lydia found herself blinking back tears again. Everything made her cry these days, and nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I'd appreciate that very much." After Martha left, Ethan found Lydia sitting at the kitchen table with a dazed expression. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I have a friend, a real friend who offered to help with the birth because she wants to, not because she's obligated." "When did that happen?" "When you let people see who you really are." Ethan sat across from her, taking her hand. "You're easy to care about, Lydia, once people get past your walls. I didn't think I'd ever have this. Community, people who care what happens to me." "Well, you do. Better get used to it." The baby was due in early September, according to Martha's experienced estimation. As summer deepened and Lydia grew larger, Ethan found himself torn between wonder and terror. Wonder at the miracle of life forming, at Lydia's strength as she carried their child through exhausting heat and physical discomfort. Terror that something would go wrong, that he'd lose them both, that he wasn't prepared for the enormous responsibility of fatherhood. "You're hovering," Lydia said one August afternoon, catching him watching her rest in the shade after working in the garden. "I'm not hovering, I'm observing." "You're hovering. You've been hovering for weeks. I'm pregnant, not made of glass." "I know. What if you need something?" "Then I'll ask for it, like I always do now." She patted the ground beside her. "Come sit. You're making me nervous with all the pacing." Ethan settled beside her, and Lydia immediately shifted to lean against him, her head on his shoulder. The baby kicked vigorously between them, and they both laughed. "Active today," Ethan observed. "Active every day. I think we're having a fighter." Like their mother. Like both their parents. Lydia placed Ethan's hand where the baby was moving. "I've been thinking about names again. If it's a boy, what about Samuel, after Sam Porter, who helped warn us about Calvin?" "Samuel Cole. I like it." "And if it's a girl?" "Grace, because that's what you gave me. Grace to heal, grace to become someone new." Ethan's throat tightened. "Grace Cole. That's perfect. So we're decided? Samuel or Grace?" "We're decided." They sat in comfortable silence, Lydia's belly shifting and moving with the baby's acrobatics, the summer afternoon warm and sweet around them. This was happiness, Ethan thought. Not the absence of trouble, but the presence of love despite it. Not a perfect life, but a real one, built with intention and care. The baby came on a bright September morning, 3 weeks earlier than Martha had predicted. Lydia woke before dawn with a gasp, grabbing Ethan's arm hard enough to bruise. "Something's wrong," she said, fear edging her voice. "It's too early. The baby's not supposed to come yet." "Or the baby's ready and Martha's timing was off." Ethan was already moving, lighting lamps, gathering the supplies they'd prepared. "How far apart are the pains?" I haven't been timing them." "Ethan, what if something's wrong? What if the baby's not ready? What if I can't—" "Hey, look at me." He took her face in his hands, steady, despite his own racing heart. "You can do this. Your body knows what to do. And I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." "Get Martha, please. I'm scared." "I will, but first I'm getting you comfortable. Then I'll ride for Martha fast as soldier can run." He helped Lydia into the rocking chair, brought her water and a cool cloth for her face. The contractions were coming faster than he'd expected for early labor, and he realized with a jolt that this baby was in a hurry. "I'm going now," he said, pulling on his boots. "I'll be back with Martha in less than an hour. You breathe through the pains. Don't push until Martha's here." "Ethan," Lydia's voice stopped him at the door. "I love you, no matter what happens. I love you too, and nothing's going to happen except you bringing our child into the world. I'll be right back." He rode harder than he'd ever ridden, pushing Soldier to speeds that were probably dangerous but absolutely necessary. Martha was already up, feeding chickens, when he thundered into her yard. "It's time," he called before he'd even dismounted. "The baby's coming, now." Martha moved with impressive speed for a woman her age, grabbing her birthing kit and calling instructions to her husband about ranch chores. She was mounted and riding beside Ethan in less than 5 minutes. "How far apart are the contractions?" she asked as they raced back. "Close. Maybe 5 minutes. Maybe less." She's scared because it's early. "Babies come when they're ready, early or not. We'll manage fine." They made it back to find Lydia pacing the kitchen, one hand braced on the table, breathing through a contraction that clearly hurt like hell. Martha took over immediately, assessing Lydia with quick efficiency, asking questions about the pain and timing and when her water had broken. "You're moving fast," Martha said approvingly. "This baby definitely wants to meet you today. Ethan, boil water. Lydia, let's get you to the bedroom." The next hours were the longest of Ethan's life. He fetched water, held Lydia's hand through contractions, wiped her face with cool cloths, and generally tried to stay useful while feeling utterly helpless. Lydia was incredible. Even racked with pain, even exhausted and scared, she remained focused. She followed Martha's instructions, breathed when told to breathe, pushed when told to push, and somehow maintained the strength to keep going when Ethan could see she wanted to quit. "I can't," she gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. "I can't do this anymore. It's too much." "You can," Ethan said fiercely, gripping her hand. "You're the strongest person I know. You survived things that would have killed other people. You can survive this. You can do this." "He's right," Martha added, checking Lydia's progress. "You're almost there. Baby's crowning. Just a few more pushes and you'll be done." "A few more?" Lydia's laugh was half sob. "I don't have a few more in me." "Yes, you do. Find them. Your baby's waiting." Somehow, impossibly, Lydia found the strength. With Ethan supporting her back and Martha coaching her through, she pushed with everything she had left. And then, in a rush of fluid and blood and primal sound, their baby entered the world. The cry was immediate and strong, and Ethan felt tears streaming down his face as Martha quickly checked the baby, cleared airways, tied, and cut the cord. "It's a boy," Martha announced, wrapping the infant in a clean blanket. Strong and healthy and angry about being born from the sound of him. She placed the baby in Lydia's arms, and Ethan watched his wife's face transform. All the pain, all the fear, all the exhaustion disappeared, replaced by pure, incandescent love. "Samuel," Lydia whispered, touching the baby's downy hair with a shaking hand. "Hello, Samuel. We've been waiting for you." The baby, Samuel, quieted at his mother's voice, eyes blinking open to reveal deep blue irises that would probably change color in the coming weeks. He was perfect, tiny and red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. "Want to hold your son?" Lydia asked, looking up at Ethan with eyes full of tears and joy. Ethan nodded, not trusting his voice, and accepted the small bundle with shaking hands. Samuel was impossibly light, impossibly fragile, impossibly real. "Hey there," Ethan managed through the thickness in his throat. "I'm your father, and I promise you, I'm going to do everything I can to give you the best life possible. You and your mother, you're everything to me, everything." Samuel made a small sound, and Ethan could have sworn the baby was listening, understanding on some level that he was loved beyond measure. Martha cleaned up efficiently, checking Lydia for complications and finding none. "You did beautifully," she told Lydia. "Textbook birth, even if it was a bit fast. You rest now. I'll come back tomorrow to check on you both." After Martha left, it was just the three of them, Ethan, Lydia, and Samuel. Ethan climbed into bed beside Lydia, careful not to jostle her, and they lay together looking at their son. "We did it," Lydia said softly. "We made a whole person." You did it. I just held your hand. You did more than that. You gave me a safe place to heal. You taught me I was worth loving. You protected me when danger came. You gave me all of this." She gestured around the room, at the ranch beyond, at the life they'd built. "Samuel exists because you chose to see value in a broken woman someone sent you in the mail. You were never broken, just hurt. There's a difference." Ethan kissed her temple, then Samuel's head. "And for the record, you gave me just as much. Purpose, hope, a reason to care about tomorrow. I was dying out here before you came. Slowly, quietly, but dying nonetheless. You saved me just as much as I saved you." Samuel chose that moment to fuss, and Lydia shifted to feed him, the action awkward at first, but quickly becoming natural. Ethan watched them, his wife and his son, and felt something settle deep in his chest. This was home. Not the ranch, not the house, but this, the three of them together, building a family from nothing but choice and courage and stubborn love. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feeding and the steep learning curve of new parenthood. Samuel was a good baby, all things considered, but he still required round-the-clock care that left both Ethan and Lydia exhausted. But it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from purposeful work, from pouring themselves into something that mattered. Neighbors came with gifts and advice and offers of help. Martha visited daily at first, teaching Lydia the tricks of motherhood she'd learned through her own 6 children. Sam Porter rode out with a hand-carved rattle he'd made. Even the circuit preacher stopped by to offer blessings, though Ethan and Lydia politely declined any formal religious ceremony. "We don't need official blessing," Ethan explained. "We've already been blessed enough." The preacher, a kind man who'd seen enough frontier hardship to understand unorthodox faith, simply nodded and offered his congratulations instead. As September faded into October and the ranch prepared for another winter, the Cole family settled into their new rhythm. Samuel grew stronger each day, his cries more vigorous, his sleep stretches slightly longer. Lydia recovered well, her body healing from the birth with the same resilience it had shown throughout her pregnancy. And Ethan discovered that fatherhood suited him in ways he'd never anticipated. He was naturally gentle with Samuel, naturally patient, naturally attuned to the baby's needs in ways that surprised even him. "You're a natural," Lydia observed one evening, watching Ethan walk the floor with Samuel, soothing him through a fussy spell. "I'm terrified every moment that I'm doing it wrong." "That's what makes you good at it. You care enough to be scared." She smiled from the rocking chair where she was mending one of Samuel's tiny shirts. "Your letters were right. Love is enough." One crisp October morning, when Samuel was 6 weeks old, Ethan carried him outside for the first time to see the ranch. Lydia followed, wrapped in a shawl, and they stood together on the porch looking out at the land that had witnessed so much of their journey. "This is your home," Ethan told Samuel, who was bundled against the cold and staring around with unfocused baby eyes. "This is where your mother and I found each other, where we learned to be brave, where we decided that love was worth fighting for." "Tell him the rest," Lydia prompted softly. "This is where you'll grow up," Ethan continued. "Where you'll learn to ride horses and plant gardens and understand that family isn't just blood. It's choice. Your mother chose to come here when she could have gone anywhere. I chose to open my heart when I could have stayed closed. And every day we'll choose each other and you. That's what makes us a family." Samuel made a small sound and Lydia laughed. "I think he approves." They stood there for a long time, the three of them, watching the sun rise over the Wyoming landscape. The ranch house behind them was warm and full of life. The barn held healthy animals. The garden, though dormant for winter, promised abundance come spring. Everything they'd built together, everything they'd survived to reach this moment, felt suddenly, powerfully real. "I never thought I'd have this," Lydia said quietly, one hand on Ethan's arm, the other touching Samuel's tiny hand where it peeked from his blanket. "A home, a family, a life worth living. I used to think survival was enough, but you showed me that it's not, that I deserved more than just not dying, that I deserved to actually live. We both deserved that. We both found it. Together." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of coming snow, and they retreated inside to warmth and safety. But the promise of that moment stayed with them, the understanding that they'd built something real and lasting from the most unlikely materials. Two broken people who'd found each other through circumstance and desperation had created not just survival, but joy, not just existence, but family, not just a house, but a home. Years later, when Samuel was old enough to ask questions, they would tell him the story about a mail-order bride who arrived frightened and fierce, about a cowboy too damaged to believe in second chances, about a winter that forced them together and a love that chose to bloom despite every reason not to. They would tell him about the hard parts too, about violence and fear, and the day his mother had to kill a man to protect their family. They would be honest about the darkness they'd both survived, because darkness was part of the story, part of what made the light worth celebrating. But mostly, they would tell him about choice, about how every single day they chose each other, chose love over fear, chose hope over despair, chose to build something beautiful from broken pieces. That was the real miracle of their story. Not that they'd found each other, the frontier was full of unlikely pairings and desperate arrangements, but that they'd looked at each other, really seen each other, and decided that what they found was worth keeping, worth fighting for, worth building a life around. As the first snow of the season began to fall that November evening, Ethan and Lydia sat together by the fire, Samuel asleep in his cradle nearby. The house was quiet except for the crackle of burning wood and the baby's soft breathing. "Do you ever regret it?" Lydia asked suddenly. "Agreeing to Tom's arrangement? Taking a chance on someone you didn't know?" Ethan pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Not for a single second. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. You and Samuel both. Even with all the complications, the danger, the violence, even with all of that, maybe especially because of it, it means we chose this consciously, with full knowledge of the costs. That makes it real in ways easy love never could be." Lydia tilted her face up to kiss him, slow and sweet and full of promise. "I love you, Ethan Cole, more than I ever thought I could love anything." "I love you too, Lydia Cole, more than words can say." They sat in comfortable silence as night deepened around the ranch. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. But inside, warmth persisted, in the fire, in their embrace, in the steady presence of the child they'd created together. This was their story. Not perfect, not easy, but absolutely, undeniably theirs. A mail-order bride and a broken soldier had become partners, lovers, parents, had transformed a lonely ranch into a home full of life and laughter and love, had proved that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings led to the most beautiful endings. And as Samuel stirred in his sleep, making the small sounds of a dreaming infant, both Ethan and Lydia felt the same fierce gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. They had survived. They had healed. They had loved. And together, they had built something worth having, something worth fighting for, something that would endure long after the snow melted and spring returned and the cycle of seasons continued its eternal dance. They had built a family, a real family, forged not from obligation or tradition, but from choice and courage and the stubborn refusal to let damage define them. That was their triumph. That was their truth. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.